Your dessert came out on a stretcher, carried by two grown men with a siren and a drum, while the whole room watched some kid dig into a sundae the size of his head. That was Farrell's, the loudest, happiest place in America to have a birthday. More than 100 of them. Then they all quietly vanished, killed by the one thing everybody loved about them. Let's get into it. To understand why grown men were sprinting across a room banging a drum over a bowl of ice cream, you have to understand the man who wanted it that way. Bob Farrell was born in Brooklyn, New York, in December of 1927 into a family that came apart early. When the stock market crashed in 1929, his father lost everything and took his own life. Bob was 4 years old. His mother couldn't raise two small kids alone, so Bob and his sister spent about 5 years in a children's home before she remarried and brought them back. I tell you that not to be grim, but because it explains everything that came after. A kid who loses the ground under his feet that early tends to grow up wanting to build places where people feel safe and celebrated and looked after. That one thing is the whole reason Farrell's felt the way it felt. He dropped out of high school in 1945 to join the Air Force, served through the end of the war, then took a job selling for a food company called Libby, learning the business the slow way, town by town, one account at a time. And somewhere out on those sales routes, he met a man named Ken McCarthy. The two of them had the same itch. They thought America was missing something. Not another diner. Not another drugstore soda counter. A place. A destination. The kind of old-fashioned ice cream parlor and corner candy store Bob remembered from his Brooklyn childhood turned all the way up. On September 13th, 1963, a Friday the 13th of all days, they opened the first one, corner of 21st and West Burnside in Portland, Oregon. Here's how good a bet it looked like on paper. They had 32 employees, $1,300 in the bank, and $26,000 in debt. Any sensible person would have told them to go home. Portland disagreed. Loudly, on opening night, they ran out of ice cream. Then they ran out of bananas. Then the hamburger buns were gone, then the lettuce, then the tomatoes, and Bob and Ken were literally sending people out to every corner grocery still open, buying up whatever the neighborhood had left just to keep the doors open one more hour. And the reason it was that packed comes down to a single sentence Bob Farrell would repeat for the rest of his life. He said, "I didn't sell ice cream. I sold a good time." The ice cream was just the vehicle. Remember that line. We're going to come back to it, because it's also the exact thing that eventually killed the company. So let me take you inside one, because if you were there, this is the part where you start smiling. You didn't walk straight to a table. First, you had to get through the candy counter up front. Barrels of penny candy, jawbreakers, all the good stuff, right at kid eye level, which was of course completely on purpose. Then the room opened up. Red flocked wallpaper, little stained glass lamps throwing warm light over the booths, and a player piano in the corner, banging out the same handful of ragtime tunes it played 10,000 times a day, nobody feeding it a coin, nobody complaining. The waiters looked like they'd wandered out of an old-timey saloon. White shirts, striped vests, garters on their sleeves, and a straw boater hat with Farrell's written on the band. Their whole job, on top of carrying trays, was to put on a show. The menu was printed to look like an old newspaper, and it was full of sundaes with names that made no sense until they showed up at your table. It even had a little joke section for anybody worried about eating too much. It advised you that everything worth eating has calories, so really you should just order a tall glass of steam, and then at least you'd have something to blow off. That was the whole sense of humor of the place. Completely ridiculous and proud of it. There was the zoo. 8.5 pounds of ice cream, 5 flavors, 3 sherbets, 5 toppings, bananas, whipped cream, nuts, cherries, and little plastic zoo animals stuck in the top. It was so big it did not come to your table on a plate. It came on a stretcher. carried by two waiters, with a siren going and a drum pounding while the whole restaurant turned around to watch. And if the zoo somehow wasn't enough, there was the hot fudge volcano. 30 scoops of ice cream, and to serve it they would set sugar cubes on fire on top and carry the whole thing out to your table flaming. In a restaurant full of small children. And nobody thought twice about it. And there was the pig's trough. A double banana split served in an actual little wooden trough. If you finished the whole thing by yourself, the staff came out banging that drum again, and they pinned a button on you that said, "I made a pig of myself at Farrell's." Kids wore that pin to school like it was a medal from a war. Hold on to that pin. It's a small thing, but it comes back at the very end of this story, and it's going to mean something different by then. Because here is what Bob Farrell understood that almost nobody else in the restaurant business did. He wasn't selling the sundae. He was selling the 30 seconds right before the sundae. The drum. The siren. The whole room turning to look at one 7-year-old who for half a minute was the single most important person in the building. That feeling was the product, not the ice cream. And that's the last time I'll say it plainly, because for the next 20 minutes, you're going to watch a company slowly forget it. Now think about what that actually took to pull off. Every single night, in every single location, a Farrell's wasn't really a restaurant. It was a live show that ran 7 nights a week with a brand new audience walking in every hour. Costume staff, a working piano, custom-built gear big enough to haul an 8-pound sundae on a stretcher, and a whole crew trained to summon real, genuine enthusiasm for a total stranger's birthday at 6 in the evening on hour 9 of a Saturday shift. Keep that in your back pocket. A live show is a wonderful thing. A live show is also expensive, and it only works if everybody keeps performing. That one fact is going to matter enormously in a few minutes. And people didn't just tolerate all this, they built their childhoods around it. For a whole generation, Farrell's was the reward. It was where the entire Little League team piled in after the game, win or lose, everybody ordering whatever they wanted. It was where your parents took you when you'd done something worth celebrating. And honestly, sometimes when you hadn't, just because it was a Friday and they loved you. And if you didn't go as a kid, there's a good chance you worked there as a teenager, because a shift at Farrell's was a rite of passage all its own. Learning to carry a loaded tray without wearing it. Learning to sing off key on command. Learning to survive a room full of sugared-up 8-year-olds on a Saturday night. The boater hat. The striped vest. The feet that still ached 2 days after a double, and a lot of that magic was just the room itself, doing the work before a single waiter even opened his mouth. Farrell's had gotten so good at conjuring that one feeling, that being the center of attention feeling, on command, that it kept working night after night, in mall after mall, and somehow never wore out. It got popular enough that it landed on television. On the Bob Newhart show, a young John Ritter played a birthday waiter who was very obviously a Farrell's server, drumming and singing at a table of mortified adults, and the joke worked instantly, without a word of setup. Because by then, just about everybody in America already knew exactly what that scene was making fun of. You didn't have to explain it. Everybody had been there. So how does one packed corner store in Portland turn into a place the whole country recognizes? Franchising. The first franchise opened on November 9th, 1965, barely 2 years in, over in Salem, Oregon. A couple named Harold and Shirley Holland put their own name and their own savings behind it. And that became the model. Not faceless corporate outposts. Real families, buying into a formula and running it like it was theirs, because it was. And the consistency was the whole trick. A Farrell's in San Diego had to feel exactly like a Farrell's up in Seattle, or the whole illusion came apart. Same sundae, same drum, same pin, the same songs on the same piano, whether you were in Oregon or halfway down the California coast. It worked. By the early 1970s, this thing was spreading across the entire West. And then a very big company came knocking. In 1972, the Marriott Corporation, the hotel giant, bought Farrell's. With Marriott's money and reach behind it, the chain exploded to somewhere around 130 locations, coast to coast. Bob Farrell stayed on as the face of it, and he turned into something close to America's official ambassador of the birthday party. He built a sundae that weighed over 1,500 pounds and put it straight into the Guinness Book of World Records. He went on the Merv Griffin show. If you were a kid in the mid-70s, Farrell's wasn't a restaurant chain. It was just a fact of life, like the mall itself. And think about what a Farrell's birthday actually gave a family. It asked almost nothing, maybe a reservation on a busy Saturday. And it handed back something money usually can't buy. A whole room full of strangers singing and banging drums for your kid. For one afternoon, some regular kid from a regular family got the full celebrity treatment. The song, the siren, a whole room of strangers suddenly paying attention to them and nobody else. Parents who'd grown up counting out nickels for a plain scoop at a soda fountain could suddenly hand their own kids something 10 times bigger and louder. So it quietly became a thing families passed down. The parents who'd had their own 10th birthday in one of those booths were, a generation later, walking their own kids in to hear that same drum. This was the top of the mountain. A brand that parents trusted with the one day of the year their kid cared about most. From the inside, it must have looked like it could go on forever. Quick thing before we keep going, because the next part is where the whole story turns. If this is bringing it back for you, if you can hear that drum in your head right now, do me a favor and hit subscribe. We dig up a lost place like this every week, and it honestly helps a lot. That's it, back to it. Because even while Farrell's was booming in 1972, it took a hit that had nothing to do with ice cream at all. And I need to stop the music for a minute to tell you about it. On September 24th, 1972, there was an air show at the Executive Airport in Sacramento, California. It was winding down for the day. Right across the road, in the Crossroads Mall, sat a Farrell's, packed with families on a Sunday afternoon. Around 100 people inside. A surplus fighter jet tried to take off at far too steep an angle, and it never got into the air. It ran off the end of the runway, tore through a fence, crossed the highway, and went straight into the restaurant. 22 people died. 28 more were hurt. A lot of them were children. There isn't a warm way to tell that, so I'm not going to try. A place built entirely around noise and joy and kids became the site of one of the worst disasters ever tied to a restaurant in this country. There is no lesson hiding in it. It wasn't the business model. And it wasn't a bad decision by anybody wearing a boater hat. It was just an ordinary Sunday that went horribly wrong, in the one kind of room where the worst thing that was ever supposed to happen to you was a stomachache. But something did come out of that day, and it matters, so stay with me. For years, firefighters in Sacramento had been begging the city for a proper burn treatment center, and getting nowhere. The crash finally forced the issue. The very next year, in 1973, the Firefighters Burn Institute was founded. It is still going today. It still cares for burn victims and funds research that helps people who get burned all over the world, not just in Sacramento. So out of the single worst thing that ever happened under that name came something that has quietly been saving people for 50 years. I wanted you to know that before we went on. All right, music back on. Let's get back to it. Because the real slow ending of Farrell's wasn't a plane. It was a boardroom. So let me tell you exactly how you lose something like that. By 1982, Marriott had run the numbers and decided that a loud, labor-heavy chain of theatrical ice cream parlors didn't really fit inside a hotel company anymore. So they sold Farrell's to a group of private investors. And this is the quiet hinge the whole thing turns on. A hotel room is the same room no matter who owns the building. But a Farrell's birthday party is not. It only exists if trained people keep performing it exactly right, every single night. New owners don't automatically inherit that. You can buy the buildings, you can buy the piano, you cannot buy the good time. And the new owners, looking at a spreadsheet instead of a kid's face, started doing the sensible-looking thing. They softened the whole loud, ridiculous, pig-of-myself personality. They quietly nudged it toward being a normal family restaurant. Fewer costumes, thinner staffing, less of the drum, less of the show. Which brings back the thing I asked you to keep in your back pocket. The show was the expensive part. It was also the entire point. So the moment you start trimming the show to save a little money, you aren't cutting costs. You're cutting the only reason anybody came. A customer who remembered the full roaring 1975 version could walk into the thinner mid-80s version and just feel that something was gone, even if they couldn't put their finger on it. The pin didn't mean as much. The drum came out less often. The magic was being quietly engineered out of the room. One reasonable decision at a time. And it worked exactly as badly as you'd expect. Through the 1980s, the locations started closing, one storefront at a time. There was no big bankruptcy, no dramatic press conference, just a slow fade. And by 1990, almost every Farrell's in America had gone dark. The loudest restaurant chain in the country disappeared about as quietly as a thing can disappear. And that's the part that stings. Nobody killed it on purpose. There was no villain. 100 small, reasonable, money-saving decisions each took a little piece, until one day somebody looked underneath and there was nothing left holding it up. Except that isn't quite the end, because Farrell's refused to die all the way. A couple of the original spots hung on in Oregon for years under slightly different names. One near where it all started in Portland lasted until about 2001, and the last real thread back to that very first store closed around 2007. Then, in 2009, after a long legal fight over who even owned the name, a California company brought Farrell's back. And here's the part that gets me. They brought Bob Farrell himself back on as an advisor. The founder, now in his 80s, giving his blessing to one more run at the dream he'd started 45 years earlier. 7 new locations opened across California. For a few years, in a handful of malls, the old magic was technically alive again. The drum still pounded. The zoo still came out on its stretcher. A kid could still walk out wearing the pin. But the world around it had changed. Rents went up. Labor costs went up. And this was still a chain trying to pay a full live show payroll on ice cream margins, competing now with trampoline parks and arcades and a dozen other places built for a kid's birthday. By 2016, the few that were left were in real trouble. Enough trouble that the brand ended up on national television on the CNBC show The Profit, where the investor Marcus Lemonis puts money into failing businesses. Lemonis put in $750,000 for 51% of the company, trying to save one of the last real ice cream theaters left in America. It didn't work. That same month, 2 of the locations closed. Then another. Then another. And a lot of them went the way the whole company eventually would, with almost no warning at all. Staff turning up for a shift to find the doors already locked. People finding out that the place they'd worked at for years was gone from a post online. The one in Buena Park held on a little longer, closed for a renovation, reopened, and made it about a year before it shut for good at the very end of 2018. Which left exactly one single Farrell's in downtown Brea, California. For a few months, that one storefront carried the entire 56-year history of the whole company on its back. And on the 8th of June 2019, it closed too. There was no farewell tour and no headline. The website just went down. The phone rang and rang. The voicemail box was full. The staff had almost certainly served their very last birthday party without ever realizing it was the last one. It had been 56 years since two broke guys ran out of bananas on a Friday the 13th in Portland and kept the doors open anyway. Now the doors were locked for good in a California strip mall, and this time there was nobody left to send out for more. Bob Farrell didn't live to see that last one close. He died in August of 2015 at 87 up in Vancouver, Washington. He spent his last working years traveling the country, teaching other companies one simple thing: that taking care of people isn't a policy you write down somewhere, it's a feeling you hand them. He used to tell a story about a regular who walked away over a 5-cent charge for a pickle, and the lesson was always the same. Don't fight the customer over the nickel, just give them the pickle. Late in life, the ice cream guy became known, a little to his own amusement, as the pickle guy. And I think that's the whole thing. Right there. Farrell's was never really in the ice cream business. Bob told us that himself, plain as day, on the very first page. He sold a good time. The ice cream just carried it to the table. What he actually built, starting with $1,300 and a room full of borrowed hamburger buns, was a way for any ordinary family with no more money than the family next door to give their kid one guaranteed afternoon of feeling like they mattered to a whole room full of strangers. Nothing that came after it ever quite bottled that again. The trampoline parks don't sing. None of them have a piano that's been playing the same tune since before your parents were born. So listen for it one more time, the way you could back then. The piano going in the corner. A whole room full of families. And somewhere across the floor, a kid you can't even see yet about to hear a drum start up just for them. Every head turns. The room leans in, and here comes that ridiculous sundae. Way too much for any one kid to finish, which was the whole idea, sailing out across a room full of total strangers who are all, for about 30 seconds, completely on this one kid's side. That was the thing Bob Farrell actually built. Not the ice cream. That sound. A whole room of strangers, for 30 seconds, deciding that a kid they'd never met was the most important person alive. It's gone now. But for a while there, it was really something, wasn't it? So tell me, which Farrell's was yours? What town, what year, and who did you go with? And be honest with me, did you ever finish the whole Trough by yourself and earn that pin? Drop it in the comments. I want to read every single one, because somebody down there remembers the exact same drum you do. Thanks for taking the trip back with me.